Hello, my fellow guntists. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Guntism. Today, we are going to be going over the quintessential Asian gun tier list. Um, Now, I will disclaim this. This is not going to be a fully comprehensive list. Uh, Obviously, I'm not going to take the time to go over every single Asian gun ever made. Why? Fuck you. Uh, anyway, uh, now there is another thing that needs to be discussed. Does my opinion on these guns mean that they are bad or good? Well, yes, actually, because my opinion is correct. Obviously, I'm joking. Uh, this is going to be pretty opinionated. I'm a little bit biased against some of these later guns, as you will see. But, you know, I try my best to give them at least a somewhat objective review. Not really. Um, anyway, we're going to be starting off with some Korean guns, moving into Japanese, and then into some Chinese guns as well. But you know, it's it'll be good. Anyways, let's get started with the K1A. This is a quote unquote submachine gun made by Daewoo in South Korea. Uh, I'm not sure if they still make this. Probably not. Uh, from what I've heard, it's kind of shitty. Uh, the original flash hider, I don't think that's the original one, apparently was very loud. There's a spider on my wall. Uh, anyway, and this little, I don't know, diminutive stock is apparently very weak. So it breaks a lot. And probably has a hella wobble, because this is in 223 Remington. So, you're using an intermediate rifle cartridge in a submachine gun package. Oh, it's a Draco. Oh, it's a Draco. Guys, I can use the Draco. No, shut up. This, like, when we're talking military activity, this is pretty suboptimal. Sure, it's compact and easy to use, but it's just not my cup of tea. It's a little unusual. I do believe this is a direct impingement gun, so basically it vents gas through the gas tube or through the gas block back, and then uses that gas to reciprocate the bolt backwards. In direct contrast to this here, the K2. I am going to be putting the K1 in D tier because, well, I've heard it's shitty. On the contrary, though, this K2 is the current modern like issue rifle that they give to most of the Korean military. It is essentially an improved version of the K1, except for one pretty big difference: the long stroke gas piston, which is pretty unusual for what is close to an AR platform. An AR platform usually is DI like this, but this thing uh, essentially has the gas piston attached to the bolt, and it reciprocates the whole way along the travel, or the whole way of the travel of the action, right? So basically, the bolt comes back to here, and the gas piston reciprocates along with it. And you can argue, yeah, the reciprocating mass adds recoil to the system, but I mean, we're talking about 5.56, especially in a full like rifle platform compared to this little goblin. Definitely will. How should I put it? Definitely will counteract some of that increased recoil from the increased reciprocating mass. So I'm gonna put it in A tier because from what I've heard, this is actually a pretty well liked gun. I've heard it's pretty reliable. Long stroke gas pistons tend to be pretty reliable. Um, Other than that, it's pretty much just your standard 5.56, kind of close to an AR platform gun. Pretty bog standard. So, it works. It does what it does. Moving on, this is the K3. If you can't tell, these are kind of a little bit ordered by their numbers. At least the Korean guns are. Anyway, this K3 is essentially an FN Mini-Me, or as the U.S. military calls it, an M249. However, this is, made and kind of quote-unquote designed by the Koreans. So this is almost a carbon copy of a 249, but not really. I mean, it's weird. This gun can do the same thing as the 249 with the drum, or basically you can do it belt fed, or you can use a magazine. And if you've ever actually shot a 249, you'll understand what I mean when I say the magazine thing using a Stanag is really poop. It's ass. It sucks. Because basically the follower of the magazine can't push rounds into the gun fast enough for the gun, for its cyclic rate. So it'll jam every couple rounds because it can't get a round up to the bolt before it goes back and back forward. Um, so, I mean, it's kind of questionable. I've heard that these are kind of shitty, just like the 249. They're kind of shitty. They don't really work too great. I think they tried to update this with like a K15 model, something along those lines. It didn't work out, I don't think. I'm pretty sure maybe the SF guys over there still use it, but I find that pretty unlikely, seeing as the gun's kind of dookie anyway. Uh, Moving on, we have the K4, and if you look at this, it'll look pretty familiar because it's basically just a Mark 19, a fully automatic 40 millimeter grenade launcher. And that's based as fuck, so it's going in S tier. I don't think I need to elaborate any further, right? I mean, come on. You know what I mean. Uh, Moving on, we got the K5. They have a pretty original naming scheme over there, don't they? Anyway, this is actually a pretty interesting little handgun, because you look at it and you're like, oh, it's a handgun, but actually this has kind of a weird like hammer mechanism in it where they call it a fast action, where you can essentially cock the hammer and compress the mainspring, but then you can decock the hammer and leave the mainspring compressed. So instead of having to, on the double action trigger pull, having to compress the mainspring with your first trigger pull, you can just essentially move the hammer back, compress the hammer spring, and bring it back until it contacts the mainspring and then goes forward and sets the primer off with the firing pin. So, yeah, I mean, even though it is kind of just a high power, it has a pretty cool little mechanism on the inside, so I think it does kind of deserve a B tier. Um, you know, if I remember correctly, it's in 9 mil. Might be 45, but whatever. Um, Moving on, we have the real star of the show, this thing. Now, your first impression might be, at a glance, MP5 SD. That is not what this is. This is a K7. Okay, and you'll notice some odd similarities between a couple of these and this, right? So, first off, it actually has basically a modified version of the K1's lower, right? It has pretty much the exact same wire stock on it, right? You can see right here and right here, those wire stocks are basically the same, almost the same grip, kind of very similar on the magwell. However, you'll also notice, look at this little baby magazine right here, little tiny boy. And then you look at the magwell and you'll see that it is almost double the size. Now, I do believe that on the underside here it is filled in so that that doesn't just like flop around, which would be very suboptimal. Uh, but it still does look a little goofy in my opinion with this weird magwell. And then you'll also notice that this actually, instead of taking a K1 upper, it actually took a K2 upper. If you take a look, you can see the rear sights are almost the same, and you see the very big similarities in the basically the top of this. I mean, it basically just looks like an AR anyway, but you will notice that up to there, it basically looks just like a K2 upper. But they integrally suppressed this little guy, which is honestly kind of funny. You can see little goofy suppressor and the handguard. It's very MP5 SD-esque, but also like if you ask someone to draw it from memory. And just for that, it's going in S tier because I think it's funny. If you disagree, feel free to not tell me. Okay, I don't care. This next one, this one's a bit of a treat. The USAS 12. This is a select fire 12 gauge shotgun. If you don't know what I mean by select fire, this can shoot in semi-automatic, so one shell per trigger pull, or this can go full auto. And this can take a 10-round box mag like this, or it can take a 20-round drum. So it's kind of like a Korean AA-12, except this one's cooler because it has the like old style M16 carry handle. So obviously it's A tier, full auto shotgun. What can I say other than that, really? Moving on, we have the K14. I mean, all I really have to say about this is it's pretty average. I think it's pretty close to being based off of a Winchester Model 70, so you wouldn't be too far off if you managed to get your hands on one of these stocks and quad rails to just dress it up like this and basically have the same gun. There might be some differences in the trigger or, the bolt manufacturing or something along those lines, but for the most part, it's basically a Model 70. And this one is actually kind of an interesting one. This is a North Korean Type 56, if I remember correctly. Let me take a look just to make sense. Oh, Type 58, excuse me. It is a Type 58. And this is, as you can see, basically just an AK, but North Korean. And the South Koreans capture these every now and again and will use these in OPFOR training. But it's going straight to F tier because it is just a carbon copy of the AK with like Korean markings. So yeah, don't at me. I don't care. Moving on, this little tiny picture right here, this is a collection of Arasakas. These were the main battle rifle used by the Japanese in World War II. They essentially were pumping out hundreds and hundreds of these bolt action, I think 7.5 Japanese, I think is the caliber, bolt actions for their soldiers to use. And so it's actually pretty interesting with these guns. Very early on in their production, there's a lot of very nice knurling, some cool engraving, all sorts of really nice craftsmanship to them. But as the war goes on, you can actually see in the craftsmanship of the bolt and the bolt handle and the wood, the trigger, etc., you can see the quality decreasing because they needed to get more and more and more of these guns out the door to fend off the Bakagaijin. And so, yeah, I think they are pretty nice rifles if they're not sporterized. You do have to be careful with Arasakas because near the end of the war they were giving training rifles out that were essentially made of pot metal, like tin. So if you shoot one with full powered 7.5, it will blow up in your face. Another thing, they have chrysanthemums on the top of their receivers, just a big flower. That's the symbol of the emperor. But when they were handing their arms over to the Americans after their surrender, they actually a lot of the soldiers were grinding off chrysanthemums because they didn't want the Americans to like sully the symbol of the emperor. So they there are obviously still a lot of Arasakas in the U.S. that do have their chrysanthemums intact, and so that increases their value to collectors. I mean, honestly, they're not worth that much anyway. I mean, in mint condition, an early war one probably would be pretty expensive, but some of the late war ones are pretty shitty looking. And those probably got sporterized anyway, which don't even get me started. I really do not like sporterization. It is stupid as hell. But we'll move on past that so that I don't go on a rant. This is the Japanese Type 100. And near the end of the war, the Japanese started pumping these little guys out. And if you're familiar with World War II submachine guns, you'll notice that this is basically just a British Sterling with like a wood stock, right? They didn't really have the time to develop their own designs back then. The Nambu is pretty interesting. I should have included that on this list, but I didn't, so whatever. But these Type 100s are pretty cool in my opinion. I mean, I don't know how many are in the US. I don't think there's a lot, and if they are, they're probably in museums, but they are very cool. Um, Not much else to say about them. I don't know a whole ton about them. I mean, near the end of the war, they started pumping out a lot more of them, but obviously the quality would decrease as things started to get more panicked. This is actually a post-war. Well, actually, was made in like the 60s, 64, I think. And this, I believe, is a Type 68. No, 86? Type 68? 86? I can't remember. Let me take Type 64. Wow, I knew the year and I still didn't know. Okay. Anyway, it's a Howa Type 64. And these guys are actually in 7.62 by 51 NATO, which is 308 in the civilian world. I mean, they are different, I believe, due to like chamber pressures, but we won't get into that in this video. This is essentially a Japanese battle rifle developed entirely by the Japanese, I believe, actually. Because this is actually not like, it doesn't work like American guns do, like a lot of American guns do. So this is actually a gas operated tilting bolt. Um, I mean, sure, you could argue that maybe like the M1 Garand was tilting bolt, but not really. Basically, the bolt will tilt forwards and backwards to keep it in lockup to contain the pressure and shoot it out the front. I think these are pretty cool. They do have a little bit of a goofy charging handle. You probably can't see it in the video, but right here at the top, I'll probably pull up a picture and post so that you can see it better. There's the little charging handle just is right on the top there, which, you know, to modern shooters might be a little bit awkward. I think I don't want to be like, yeah, you know what, it'll go B tier, right? It's pretty much just your standard battle rifle with a little bit different of a operating mechanism. I don't know how well it like works. I don't really. I mean, I could do a bit more research and get back to you, but I haven't heard much complaining about them. I mean, none of these. I don't think any of these are in the U.S. I don't think there's a single one outside of Japan. Actually, they don't export guns, just period. Well, any military hardware at least, because Howa does import guns into the U.S. Or well, somebody imports Howas into the U.S. anyway. Moving on, this is the Howa Type 89, and can you guess when it was made? Probably 1989. Anyway, the Type 89 takes 5.56 by 45 millimeter NATO, if you can believe it, and it's pretty much just your standard like assault rifle. It's a short stroke gas piston, rotating bolt system, so it's actually probably closest to something like a 416. Obviously not in looks, but in operation it's pretty close to a 416. So it has a little piston in here that kind of shimmies back and forth and doesn't go the whole way with the bolt. That's what short stroke means. The piston only moves back and forth a little bit, and it transfers most of its energy into the bolt to get it to reciprocate. 5.56. I mean, I'll give it kudos for the short stroke instead of being a DI, just AR clone, but for the most part, it's just kind of average. Uh, and now we're getting into the part where I'm pretty biased against these guns. These are all Chinese guns, and sure, there's some Norinco fanboys out there that are probably gonna bitch and moan in my comments, but I don't really care either way. Starting off, I believe this is a Norinco Type 86, and it probably looks pretty familiar because this is basically a Chinese copy of the Groza. Very tall charging handle, which I'm not a big fan of, and also it has a pretty short sight radius. So, normally we like to mount our front sights pretty far out. I mean, you can see, right, we like to have pretty long distances between our sights. So that actually increases the precision of your sight picture. And so this, I mean, I don't know how long this gun is, but I'd estimate those are probably only 6 inches apart, which is getting close to like handgun levels of accuracy with your irons. So it's probably not all that effective. It's basically just an AK but short. You can kind of see this is like an AK shaped receiver with what looks like one of the most painful stocks to shoot with ever attached. Um, I really probably would not want to shoot this gun. I think it's in some weird like Chinese proprietary cartridge. I'm gonna put it in F tier because it's basically just a Groza. So don't at me. Moving on, we have the I believe this is a QBZ 191, and this is kind of like a modular Chinese AR almost. I don't really know how to describe this gun. I'd say it's closest to an AR, but still different, right? Obviously, we don't have the long magwell of an AR like this, and it kind of actually you might even be able to kind of akin this to, God, what are those things? The like monster, whatever, the 7.62 by 39 ARs that have the weird like long mag, the rock and lock. You might be able to kind of compare this to those. This is modular though, so it's kind of weird. There's like 3 barrel lengths, so I believe this is the AR length. So this would be a 14.5, 14.5 inches. There's a 10.5 inch carbine version and a 21.7 inch like machine gun version. I don't know, actually. I don't think this has gone into service yet. I I mean, usually programs like modular weapon that can transform between the 3 different like use cases isn't really all that effective. I mean, you can see that with like the G3. The G3 had a couple other constituents that would essentially do the same thing. I mean, the MP5 is kind of like a little baby G3 anyway, but they had a LMG version that never caught on alongside the G3. So I mean, it looks kind of cool. I mean, but to me, something looks just off about this right here. Like, just don't flame me for this, but it's going D tier. Uh, Moving on, we have the QBZ 95, which, boy, I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off there because I think this thing is super ugly. It again, retarded tall, like carry handle and front sight. So like, look at this height of bore. Right here, it's not so bad. But I mean, that's got to be like a good 3-4 inches over bore line, right? So I mean, at close range, you are going to be shooting pretty low. It's questionable. At least in my opinion, I don't think this gun is a very good gun. From what I have heard, I think somebody managed to get their hands on one of these outside of China. These things are prone to jamming. Um, I mean, what do you really expect? Uh, yeah, I mean that length of pull also kind of looks like egregious. I don't know. I don't know what else really to say about this gun. I'm just not a big fan. Way too tall charging handle, way too tall front sight. It just looks weird. I mean, come on. It just like what? Who designed this? Anyway, we're gonna move on to our final weapon, the QSW-06. And this thing is essentially like kind of like a Chinese Mark 23. Um, in fact, that's pretty much what it is. Well, I'd actually say it's more akin to like a USP, uh, which honestly, if you look at most of these Chinese guns, they're pretty much just rip-offs of something else, which is pretty common for Chinese guns. I like USPs, and I like suppressed handguns. Apparently, this did actually have a pretty good service life with the PLA. I think they're replacing it, or they wanted to replace it, and they haven't yet. I don't know. Uh, I mean, it's just kind of carbon copy. I'm debating between C and D. Uh, it's tough, right? Because, you know, I love the USP, but I don't know how this thing performs. You know, due to the, you know, reputed good service history of the gun, I think I'm going to put it in C tier, just because, you know, it's okay. It's not, like, we're not talking K7 or Mark 9, well, K4. We're not talking either of those, but we're not talking like North Korean AK or these creatures levels of gross. So yeah, I think C is fair. Anyways, I guess that finishes it off. If you want to comment and tell me what you disagree on, go ahead. I probably won't read it, or I will respond and call you an idiot. Um, I will go over this one more time just so that you can kind of get a sense for all the names. K4, K7, K2, USAS 12, K5, Arasaka. That's not like the cyberpunk Arasaka. It's Arisaka, not ARA. Type 64, K14, Type 100, Type 89, QSW-06, K1A, I believe, K3, QBZ-191, Type, oh god, Type 58, yeah, Norinco Type 86, and then the QBZ-95. Thank you for watching my stupid video about guns I've never shot, and maybe you'll catch the next one. Thanks.